My name is Enrique Sobejano. I'm a member of the Akademie der Künste in Berlin in the architecture section. And it is a pleasure today to introduce the lecture of Josep Ricart. He is one founding member of the architect teams from Barcelona, HARQUITECTES, who have been just now this year awarded with the Berliner Kunstpreis in the section of architecture. So first of all, I would like to say congratulations to you, Josep, and to your partners in the name of the members of the Academy. It's a pity that you cannot be with us today in Berlin. We know why. Obviously, this pandemic situation makes it impossible, but I will be very happy to listen to your lecture anyway through this system and having a conversation with you. I would like to say that when the Academy offered me to be a member of part of the jury this year, along with the architects Hilde Léon and Jean-Louis Cohen, we started to meet periodically online. Obviously, we could not do it in Paris or in Berlin or in Madrid, as we definitely would love to have be possible to do. But however, we started from the beginning with a series of conversations, several meetings, and an interesting discussion arose about what would be important in a way to highlight in the award of this year. No? And we soon agreed that it would be important to go back to what I like to think as sheer architectural qualities. I mean, how a good architecture is shaped by space, by light, by relation to the context, by materiality, by an attitude of respect to environment, which was an important one that we discussed, and not so much necessarily focusing on other facts that in recent awards, with a clear reason, have been linked to generations or non-Western countries or gender questions. Or in other words, we wanted to really focus on architecture as an expression of culture. So, and from this at the beginning, you can imagine larger list of architects and works that we were studying, we got to a sort of a selected, reduced group of high quality European architects where the jury decided to award UH architects. So if you allow me, I would like to briefly quote some paragraphs of the jury protocol. Quote, the jury composed of Jean-Louis Cohen, Hilde Léon, and Enrique Sobejano has unanimously decided to give the prize to HARQUITECTES, the team David Lorente, Josep Ricart, Xavier Ros, and Roger Tudó, established in 2000 in Barcelona. Over a period of 20 years, HARQUITECTES has shaped a remarkable body of works which are harmoniously inserted in the diverse geographies of Catalonia, from its dense city centers to its sprawling suburban areas and villages. Their buildings escape both the exhibitionism of commercial programs and the folkloric complacency of neo-vernacular pastiche, thanks to their subtle handling of context and their refined use of materials. Taken together, they constitute a remarkably cohesive oeuvre in which every edifice explores undogmatically a particular geometry. In their variety, the houses of HARQUITECTES form a collection of site-specific responses in which typology is not considered as a rigid, frustrating framework, but is adjusted flexibly to the local scale and to the atmosphere of the neighborhoods of the landscapes in which they are inserted. In the midst of the Catalan metropolis, the microcosms of HARQUITECTES represent a warm human approach to architecture, which shows that today's discipline is not exclusively geared towards the erection of proud monuments, but it also capable of transforming the everyday in a compelling alliance of comfort and imagination. End quote. So I would like to mention, before giving the word to Josep as well, that this lecture is part of a very interesting series organized by the Akademie der Künste with a title on the power and duty of architecture, which has been running since already a long time, organized by the responsibles of the architectural section. and that after the talk today now with Josep Ricart, we'll have time afterwards to have a discussion as it's common, which I hope it will be of interest to all of you. So, Josep, I give you the floor now, and it will be a pleasure really to listen to your presentation.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you for your words. Thank you, of course, to the jury for the kind words and also for the general concepts and your approach. And of course, thank you for the prize, for this award, which is a big honor for us. An expected honor, and I really would like to be there to share it with you and to say thank you to you in person. I hope that in a very close future this will be possible when we get over these terrible times that we are living. Not terrible because the disease itself, but terrible because the distance that produces between people and the difficult to share experiences and so on. Just to introduce a little bit my, I hope, short lecture. I don't know if it will be as short as possible because I have a natural tendency to talk too much, and when there's no people in front just to share the sensation if I'm getting too long or not, it's a little bit dangerous. But I will try to be as short as possible. I will try to explain you a little bit a short chronology of the office and some projects, but I have specially prepared this explanation about something that is now in the atmosphere of the office, something that we are trying to catch, a concept that for us right now is close to the definition of we are dealing with, we are concerned about, which is the title of the lecture that I've done, which is called The Invisible. Now, if it's all right to you, I will begin with the presentation. I've given this title because I think it's seductive enough, but I've done this under title to make it more understandable, because I'm not talking about the invisible in a very poetic way. Of course, it has that poetic dimension, but I'm talking about something as simple as what is difficult to get through an architectonic photograph. Is like a resume of that. When we began, like it was before the 20 years is when the office officially opened, but we met each other at the university, so we've been working together for 25 years maybe. At the very beginning of the office, we didn't have a clear personal speech. The office was not about theoretical approaches. The office were really based on an idea of action, of an idea of construction. We were absolutely highly compromised with the idea that we want to build our projects. So that was the basic and the only theoretical approach. During the next 10, 15 years, maybe till now, we've been building something close to a speech, really based on an objective approach, or where the objectivity is more or less the basic aim of our discourse. The objectivity in terms that something as basic as the methodology in the office, because we are 4 partners, has to be absolutely away of the personal desires of the partners. I mean, that from that point of view, which is absolutely methodological, all our speech is based in objectivity, just from that point. The objectivity of common places that it's easy to be shared between the 4 partners, as the parametric approach to the simulations, or the approach to the vernacular construction, but not because the culture, or not because the heritage dimension, but because of the efficiency that you can find out in all the vernacular examples. So during these 20 years, we've been more or less sharing that idea based on objectivity, but now it's clear to us that there's something else, something difficult to be defined, that in architecture there's too much complexity, too much invisible parts, that is too difficult to be just self-confidence with the smart sentences, the smart short sentences that we've been using during 20 years to define what we are trying to do. So when I'm talking about the invisible, it's nothing clear, it's not a clear point that we want to explain now, but it's what we are concerned about now. And I won't begin with that beautiful painting, because maybe the painting is more able to catch that something else that is in architecture, and maybe I would define as dense atmosphere. I think that this painting from Ramon Casas, a highly skilled painter from the end, the in-between 19th, 20th century, a high-skilled painter but too lazy to become as famous as his skills deserves, did a lot of paintings in this porch at his summer house, and I think that this painting catch a little bit that idea of dense atmosphere that has, in my opinion, has these three parts: the idea of someone getting an experience, natural conditions producing the experience, and architecture managing the conditions to produce experience. I think that these three basic elements are in this painting producing that dense atmosphere that for me explains a little bit my aim trying to catch that invisible part of architecture. Because and I don't know if it's because it's a painting and it's not a photograph, but if it's like this, maybe the key question is about time. I think that maybe in painting, of course, that when I'm doing if a photographer is listening to me now, maybe he will be completely disagree with me, and I'm sure that he's right, but it's just a very basic approach. But I think that the concept of time, it's really about this invisible part of architecture. I'm showing this diagram, very simple diagram, that my partner Roger did when he was trying to do his PhD, and it's a very simple calculation that we did about 100 square meters house. In the left part of the diagram is if you do the calculation of the heavy of the house with the solid part of the house, which is the dark gray, the liquid part of a house because of the pipes and so on, and the gaseous part of the house in the top of the pyramid in such a few proportion. But if you do the same calculation for the same house, not for an instant, not for just a moment, but for a year, which is the meaning of ein in that diagram, the calculation completely became the inverse, because the solid part of the house is always the same, but the liquid part is renewing all the time, and the same with the gaseous part, like is the air, which is all the time changing. It's just maybe it's a silly diagram, but it's a good example to express the importance of time, not only in thermodynamics, but in everything. In fact, without time, nothing exists. And I think that then, if you introduce the idea of time in architecture, maybe we are getting closer with what is the invisible in architecture. Because through the photography, I have the sense that you're just catching the instant. You're just catching a moment. And for me, this is the key about there's something out of the photograph that is difficult to define, that is about the invisible, but it's about time. And just to present some vectors that I imagine that can express the idea of time in architecture, for me the first vector to express time in architecture is people behavior, people performance. People performing into architecture is the first concept of time and architecture that has high importance in the aim to define what is the invisible in architecture. People in architecture, people performing is is a very important part of that invisible part of architecture. Natural conditions performing, wind, breeze, natural conditions and physical phenomena performing is also an important part of that invisible in architecture. And of course, architecture performing with physical phenomena is the third part that as a triangle maybe can define a little bit vectors of time and are close to be the sides of this invisible in architecture. People performing is for me is the first. When we are projecting, we are not projecting objects. We are projecting people having experiences. We are projecting the performance of everything. That's what we are projecting. Then we define conditions, and at the end we take decisions basically about matter and geometry. We are organizing matter, but the projection, the preview that the architects are doing through the discipline is about the happening of the experience. And in fact, not now, but at the beginning of the office, we were more or less well known in Barcelona because it was supposed that we were an office concerned about sustainability, but not because we were using passive and active strategies that we were using or using biospheric materials that we were using, but because we have a previous basic strategy about sustainability that was based on the idea of the use of the object. What is sustainable or unsustainable is not the building itself, it's how we use the building. Of course that you can produce architecture easiest to be used in terms of sustainability, but what is important is to project the performance of people in terms to be concerned about the sustainability and the consequences of our constructions in terms of environment. Natural conditions, of course. We have a clear idea. For me, it's difficult to transmit, but for me, it's like it's close to the idea of faith. But I think that faith is not about architecture. But let's use the concept of faith about the real comfort in terms of real luxury. If we talk about luxury in a disciplinary approach from the point of view of architecture, I think that it's only understandable if we are talking about getting comfort through natural conditions. When you're producing a situation of comfort thanks to managing to natural conditions, cross ventilation, inertia, shadow, insulation, this is the way to produce the perfect comfort. Not always is possible. Sometimes we need the help of specific engines and so on. But as much as possible, the real comfort, the real luxury in architecture is close to the use of natural conditions to produce comfort. Not only in outside spaces that are the easy way in a more warm climate as ours, but also through sun gains and so on. And the third aspect that I was talking about is that idea of the building performance, the building taking advantage of its natural condition, about its nature. So in the nature of certain structures, there is the inertia, so use the inertia. In the nature of certain materials, there's the natural insulation, so use that. So by using the nature of the building, manage physical phenomena also in that third aspect of the performatic in architecture. So these three parts that are talking about time are also talking about the invisible. Of course, that there is the memory if we are talking about time in architecture. So the fourth vector about time in architecture is the idea of memory. In our case, and I will talk about that a little bit later, our relation with heritage, our relation with memory, our relation with the pre-existing is very based on the idea of the attributes in the pre-existing. The idea to the first step in order to give value to the pre-existing, to the memory, is also to ask to that organized material that is already there to perform also in order to be part of the new construction. But even talking about time, even talking about these 3-4 vectors about time, there's something else difficult to be explained, difficult to be defined, that produce that invisible in architecture, which I think it's something about, but it's not absolutely clear, it's something about size, it's something about cubic meters, it's something about spaces, as Jackson Delat explained, spaces that have to be special but not specialized, spaces that are highly defined by use, by texture, by size, but not by its function. As Jackson Delat said, functionalism is against freedom of use. So it in certain architecture schools could seem the same, but functionalism in fact restricts the freedom of use. That it doesn't mean that we are doing no useless architecture. We have to do highly useful architecture, but not in terms of function, but in terms of human being, in terms of people performing. So I think that series of special spaces, but not specialized spaces, is something also about that invisible in architecture that we are trying right now, right today, in the working process of the office, trying to catch and trying to be very concerned about every time that we are in front of a new project. But we were not always like this. At the very beginning of the office, we were completely the opposite. When we began, as I've told before, what was easy to be shared, but for partners, in that idea of, we were not by that moment more or less concerned about the idea of objectivity. We were just concerned about something that was easy to be shared between 4 people, which was that architecture without architects, that architecture that surrounds us in our towns, in our village, that is that kind of popular construction, very efficient, very smart, where our grandpas used to live, where some of us we used to live also, and that kind of very attached, very simple, popular construction was our first reference. And when we began in that, it was just a visual reference. We were trying to be the same in terms of just in a formal approach like this house. Then after that, we began to understood that behind that formal, behind that aspect, it was simple to understand that, because that kind of popular construction is something away from a representative language. And when you are 4, and it's very difficult to share personal desires, personal approach, the idea of language is something very difficult to share between 4. So that's why maybe at the very beginning of the office we began to be interested in that kind of popular construction, which are not highly defined by representative or by any kind of language. So that was the reason of the first approach. But then we began to understand that behind that decisions in the popular construction about the proportion of halls, about the kind of the importance of the blind two-dimensional walls and so on, there was constructive and structural reasons, like the structural walls. So we began to check how to produce facade, how to produce the same look for buildings through structural walls. After that idea of a structural wall to produce facades, we began to understand that the structural wall is not just a structure element, but is a structural system, that you need structural walls and walls to stabilize the main walls, and is a geometrical system that is also at the same time producing giving geometry to the indoor space, which it was and as I'm defining this is the true evolution of the office through the from that visual approach to a more deeper approach in terms of construction, or in terms of not only construction but in terms of how to produce, how to give conditions to the space, how to give conditions to people performing by using all the elements that are involved in construction and design. And not only in terms of structure, because that structural system based in structural walls, working at compression and so on, then we discovered that it could be also a performatic system who talks also about thermodynamics through cross-ventilation, through the idea of inertia to produce comfort and to stabilize the indoor conditions. Now, well, maybe not now, but we are on that idea to put something else, to put something else in the equation, to catch that something else, that invisible, maybe by introducing also the memory of the place, as in this case, where we are using the stones and the arids of the soil in the plot to produce that wall, in order to get as closer as possible as the Ignacio Paricio idea. Ignacio Paricio is an incredible constructor, architect, and teacher in Barcelona. Well, he used to be in Barcelona school, and he's with Luis Clotet, authors of this beautiful library in Barcelona, in an old warehouse. Well, it's a logistical building from the 19th century. But Paricio concept is about that idea that there's a chance for a kind of architecture based on that kind of construction where a structure and a space are the same thing. It's not the only way to produce architecture, of course, but it's the easiest way to produce perdurable architecture, to produce something that can age and get elderly in an organic way, in a very in a non-artificial way, something that can be old, that can grow old without any problem. It's that kind of homogeneous solutions that are difficult to get broken. So just in order to compare, of course that the facade of a new hospital is highly perfect than this building. But you need that all the elements that are monofunctional are working perfectly all the time during all the hospital life. But in this building that has more than 150 years, and they've done a new library, a marvelous library, is getting old. It's not as new as the first time that it was built, but it's getting old in a very natural way, which is something that for us is close again to that invisible and, well, at least what is obvious to anybody that has been in this library is that idea of dense atmosphere, that when you are there, the silence, also the smell of the old walls, the geometry, the light, produces a dense atmosphere that it's amazing, it's incredible. Well, this is where we are, trying to catch that invisible in architecture, having fun through this process, having fun talking about that through the projects, but at the end we are projecting. And our basics strategies, I want to explain just a short group of projects to explain a little bit the basic strategies of the office. I think that there's like 6 projects here. I hope not to be too boring to you. This is the basic, or what I define as a very basic strategy that we are using, and more or less I've introduced in my words before, which is that idea of taking advantage of the nature of the building. Every material, every product, every organized matter that we project, there's some attributes that are included in the nature of that organized matter. So at the end, we are not far different of other architects. I'm sure that all who is involved in the discipline is always getting demands and managing availabilities to give a solution, to give an answer to that demands. And in this difficult, complex equation that means the projection process, we are using construction and the organized matter to getting into the solution. What I think that maybe is more specific about our personal approach is that idea that from the very elemental parts of the buildings, which are a structure and envelopment, a structure to support the living performance, an envelopment to protect from the outside the living performance, from that very elemental parts, we ask to that very elemental parts to perform in as much as number of possibilities. I mean that we are asking the structure not only to support people, but also to produce comfort through its inertia, to produce acoustic comfort because it's geometry, to manage the natural light, to hold the pipe system. So we are asking the elemental parts to use all its behaviors possible, because the behavior of the structure is not only to support. If you design that structure through a deeper research, you will find out a lot of behaviors a lot of attributes that can be assumed by that part of the building. Then, when you get into of course that we are not always able to answer to all that demands by these two basic parts but we try to. So when you can get that, then the elemental parts became fundamental. Then when you're getting complexity in terms of answers, in terms of performance, in terms of behavior of the elementals, then you get the fundamental, because you're not denying the complexity. You're not trying to be minimalist in terms of complexity, in terms of demands, but we try to do it through that very elemental parts, which are the structure and the envelopment. This is a research center that we did 8-9 years ago. Well, when it began, it's very close to the office. It's a research center in a university, and just to explain these two very elemental parts, which are the structure and the envelopment, and how does behave, how does perform in as much as possible number of answers to the demands. This is a very simple structure, but very high roofs per floor. That is just to explain that it's a very simple concept based on the idea that on winter time it works as a very close box, getting as much as sun gains as possible, and on summertime the envelopment works as a porch. It gets completely open to become that box in box system where the skin has close to disappear, in order to produce a high level of cross ventilation and to become that diagram. So on summer is completely open, also working as a shade system. In winter it's closed in order to become a greenhouse. So this is is a clear example of the performatics in building, the performatic part of construction. Not of architecture, because performatic in architecture is about people, is about natural conditions. This is a clear example about the performatic part of the construction. So the structure, which is a heavy concrete structure, that we assume that the building has these two parts, the structure in order that has to be there for 100 years to become have a good relation in terms of embodied energy. And on the other hand, the envelopment as something easy to be renewed, easy to be changed in a close future. But the structural part, which is that heavy concrete structure, is not only there to support people, is also there to assume the pipes that do the renovation of the inside air, in order also to make it lighter, but with a high level of inertia, because this is a 40 centimeters slab, with that inertia that helps to stabilize the inside temperature, and also with all kind of pipes, because other systems, well, it's just to understand that idea that it's not just a slab, is also a geometry that, because of the irregular surface in that site, helps not only about inertia, because by this silhouette is giving double surface in terms of interchange for the inertia, but is also helping to absorb a little bit the noise. So this is the exciting moment when we were before to put the concrete in the slab with the precast system and all those pipes, making the slab lighter, but at the same time doing the interchange system of air and so on, that heavy structure. And on the other side, that skin, that envelopment, which is the other elemental part of the building, which is not only a rainproof system, is not what is protecting you from the rain, is also a system that works as a greenhouse in winter, works as a shade in summer. It can be open, it can be closed. It's producing that situations, but also it's producing that moments. Here we can see how the slab, because of the texture, becomes not only better in terms of inertia system to stabilize the indoor temperature, but also in order to help in the absorption of the excess of noise. The greenhouse became a real greenhouse in the highest level, because I haven't explained that this research center is about that kind of technology, is a environmental research center, so they do that kind of funny research. So the greenhouse effect became a real greenhouse in the top level. As I've explained a little bit before, that our position in front of heritage, of course, that we are concerned about composition, about the cultural dimension of the heritage, but our first approach to heritage is always trying to discover, trying to find out the real attributes, the already there attributes of that organized matter. Is that organized matter? I sound a little bit like a surgeon, it's like very cold, like I'm talking, but I have to say that we also have that emotional approach to the heritage, but we are also as objective as possible in terms to understand what are the real attributes of that heritage, in order to help us to be part of the new organized matter that will be the future building. Well, in this case, that this is an old cooperative building for workers in a crowded neighborhood in Barcelona. Just to explain that the basic attributes, apart from the historic, apart from that beautiful history, because it was for workers, made by workers and paid by workers and so on, but it was also an organized matter able to work in terms of a structure. So still able, the walls were still able to hold up, to stand up the new, maybe new slabs, maybe new roof and so on. So the first question, it was not about history. The first question was about what part of the building can already be able to assume new heavy, new programs, new weights. So from that part, the first decision in that building was to demolish a part, not only because structural reasons, but also for geometrical reasons, because geometry is also an attribute of the heritage. Geometry in terms that, because of the size, that heritage is able to assume that program or that use or that way of use. So also from that two approach, the structural performance and the geometrical attributes, we decided to demolish that core, that central part of the building, producing a new path in order to change completely the circulation, change completely the behavior in terms of thermodynamics, but keep the spaces that are still able not only to support people, but also to assume new uses as a theater, a small concert hall, multi-purpose halls, and so on, classrooms, and so on. This is the section where we still can see the original parts on the left side and the new path covered by a bioclimatic roof, able to produce that intermediate spaces that are in a symbiosis with the really indoor spaces. The theater, of course, it has to be absolutely insulated in terms of noise and so on and so on. But the primary air of the theater goes to the intermediate space in order to produce a natural convection, because the roof works as a natural engine and so on. This is that kind of intermediate spaces that we are producing by the demolition of a part of the building, that are absolutely bioclimatic spaces working by natural engines and so on. And this is a beautiful experience in the very center of Barcelona, and we've been honored with several prizes because of this building, which is called La Lleialtat Sancenca. The intermediate and the indoor, this is the old main hall in the old cooperative, in the original building that now has become a theater that needs a lot of curtains to close everything, but in terms of geometry and structure, we're still able to support the new use. Now we have finished this project for a new theater in an old theater in Barcelona called Teatre Arnau. Because of the pandemic, now the process has been stopped. It's supposed that we should be building the building right now, but it's been stopped because of the crisis. We don't know what will happen in the future, but I think it's an interesting project in order to ask still something else to that preexistence, to ask the preexistence to perform also about this invisible, producing that dense atmosphere. In this case, it's not about structural performance, because the structure in this building, this is a very famous theater in the famous old theaters avenue in Barcelona, which is Parallel Avenue, close to the port, where in the old times it was an avenue full of that kind of theaters, but that kind of music halls and that kind of cabaret places. But the construction system for that theaters were very basic, very close to that kind of construction that were used in port logistical buildings, very simple timber structures with very light steel beams, and something very, very, very light that was to be built in a very short time because of money, because of legal concessions and so on. And just the Teatre Arnau is the last theater that still stands up in that famous avenue in Barcelona. So we were very proud to win the competition, and our project was basically to get a new use for the timber structure, which is the characteristic in that kind of buildings. But as the timber structure were absolutely out of order, in that case was not able to be used again in order to support something, we decided to reuse the timber structure, the wood beams and so on, in order to produce two things. In the inside, a new kind of atmosphere. We have, because of the program, it's not necessary to use the second floors, the second and third floor of the theater, and we prefer a multifunctional just basement floor. The second and the third floor, it's been partially demolished just to keep the structural part, that timber structure, in order to produce like a spider home group of lines floating in the space, in order to recognize the original geometry of the theater, in order to give that cultural dimension, and also to produce a very specific and special atmosphere in that theater. So we are doing that naked process to the timber structure to produce that beautiful atmosphere because of that beams, timber beams and lines like floating into the space. On the other side, we've done a new cultural center close to the theater, and the second performance that we are getting from the original timber structure is that, as it's not possible to use it anymore to hold up, to stand up the new structures and the new uses, we will use the vertical timber columns in order to be used as the precast system for the new concrete walls that will be the new structural system. So, well, I think that this drawing, maybe it will be, yeah, well, so the old columns and timber beams will be the new precast system to produce, in order to produce the new precast concrete walls, giving that game of textures not only in the facade but also inside the theater. Well, I don't know, maybe I'm doing it too large, but just two strategies more, two concepts more. Before to end, that fluid, what we call the fluid matter. So if you remember the diagram that I've shown at the beginning, talking about the importance of time in architecture, and that idea of because of time, we discovered the importance of time through the diagram, because suddenly the air, when you do the calculation of the weight of the building, the air during a year become the principal part in terms of weight in a building. Is not just a silly diagram, is a real thermodynamics diagram that expresses the importance to manage the air, but not artificial air, but natural air that comes from outside, that you have to manage, that maybe you have to treat, that maybe you have to make it warmer, but you have to use the natural conditions in order to take advantage also of the nature of the construction to produce that indoor comfort. This is a building that we've done also in Barcelona. Is not exactly a rehabilitation, but it's part of there's a part of the building which is an heritage case, because there's an old facade of an old factory, but basically it's a completely new building designed to be an adult school. So basically it's a group of classrooms. The nice part of this building is to explain that how such a very Euclidean, very clear structural system is not just a system of parallel walls, it's basically a construction system designed in order to give conditions to the air. Not only to give conditions in order to give temperature, to control humidity, also to manage the speed and the movement of the air. So this is not just a building based on inertia, it's also a building where the system to move the air in order to get the number of renovation enough for the health in the inside of the building is done thanks through a natural engine, which is that pyramids in the roof, which are for very powerful natural sun chimneys. Well, just in order to explain a little bit the strategy in terms of architecture, this is a very strange shaped plot with this triangular shape in Sants neighborhood in Barcelona, that because of an old factory that used to be here in that area, there's that protected facade that it has to be keep on the place, beautiful old facade, but based on a compositional system in order to be a factory as it used to be. So in terms of height, in terms of proportion of halls, were absolutely difficult to manage in order to place there, behind there, like 18 classrooms because of the... So we decided to did that 2 steps behind strategy, placing the new facade like 2 meters behind the old facade in order to get a courtyard, in order to get a patio to manage the natural light conditions for all the classrooms and don't be restricted by the former facade geometry. And then basically we decided to transform the patio into an atrium in order to pre-treat, to give conditions to the primary air for the renovation system, and also to become an open patio for the summer conditions. But the interesting part of the building is that the natural engines, the natural engines in terms of getting sun gains to give warmth to the outside air, and to produce that sun chimneys in the roof in order to move the air. So in general we give the energy to the surfaces through the walls in a passive system or in an active system, but in this case we tried also to give conditions to the air by moving it. So this is a structural wall system, this building, in order to get as maximum as inertia as possible inside. But this very Euclidean plan is not only about to do a facility for classrooms as clear as possible, it's also the way that the structural walls are giving shape to the air that goes from outside to the courtyard, and through the courtyard, through the classrooms, to the roof, by following the shape, the geometry of the structural walls. So this is the behavior section of the building, getting air from outside, doing a pre-treatment in that courtyards, not only in the south facade but also in the north facade. And just because the natural engine, which is the sun chimney, the air goes up, cross the classrooms, getting warm also from the walls, from that heavy walls that are structural with lot of inertia, and also are giving conditions to the air in terms of humidity, because this kind of walls, non-painted walls or painted with an open porous paint, are able to control the humidity. And we are doing all this with that natural engine. We are doing all this also with a high level of, not much engines, but high level of monitoring systems to control that we are really getting the standards necessary needs to that kind of facility. So this is the north courtyard that is working as the same as the south courtyard, working as that kind of atrium in winter, patio in summer, as a pre-treatment before the air cross the classrooms. And that's the natural engine. That was a funny research process that we did using simulations, and it was a very, very, very interesting process that is based on natural phenomena, in physics phenomena, but needs more than engines. It needs a lot of engines in terms of simulation and a lot of hours in terms to close all that in a nice design that works also in order of culture, because there's a tower behind it used to be a factory, there's a tower behind the building. So we try to do what in the office we call as round project, when we achieve to put all this together, not only the thermodynamical dimension, but also the cultural dimension, the construction dimension. This is a nice winery that we've just finished last year, so we've just got the pictures now. This is a winery in the south of Catalonia, in a very nice small town, and close to the church. We get that commission to do a winery inside the town, which is very typical in that town, by using 4 or 5 former houses plots. The geometrical decision was very simple because of the general plan of the town. We have to produce that kind of inside courtyard to get distance from the neighbors, but we decided to do a larger courtyard, but a courtyard with conditions to be not only a courtyard but to be also a multi-purpose space with outside conditions but protected from the rain, in order to be a logistic space for the grapes, but also a representative space for visitors and so on. So that's a section of the building, and is also an example. I think that is an example for a lot of things, but I'm just explaining this also in that aspect of the fluid matter and the importance of air in architecture, and the importance of air in the construction of that invisible part of architecture. In terms of thermodynamics, it's obvious when we are talking about the invisible, it's obvious what we are talking about, that thermodynamics is about to give conditions to the air. Thermodynamics in architecture is about how I'm using geometry, attributes of the matter to produce comfort conditions, and so the air is an essential part of this part of design in architecture. In this beautiful building, I just want to explain that specific part, which are again that heavy walls that are not only producing inertia in order to make more stable the inside temperature, but is also here we can see that courtyard that surrounds the bathroom. The bathroom is in the middle. The courtyard is surrounding the former geometry of the plots, producing that intermediate space. The bathrooms is in the middle. The courtyard is following the shape like this, getting sun from the overlap of the slabs. And then in the middle we have basically the bathrooms upstairs and the cellar downstairs in the basement. All the building is completely made not only by bricks, not only by structural walls, but by this kind of multi-layer structural walls that are working as beams in the roof and are working as structural walls in the edge, in the frame of the plan. And this is because we are trying to produce a very interesting thermodynamical effect, which is that through a convention effect, the air is going down through these multi-layer walls and is going up in the inside space. But this is because in the roof we have that swimming pool, that layer of water, that during the night the layer of water goes up to get the cold from the bóveda celeste, from the sky, because the interchange with the sky, it tends to infinite, so you're getting a lot of cold even in summer time, and during the day the water layer goes down to this inside interface to give cold to the air that is going up through the space. It's a very simple convection, but produced by this natural engine, which is to place cold here, then the hot air goes up, but gets cold and goes down. Of course, that there's also cross ventilation with the outside when the outside conditions are good. But the interesting part of the building, in terms of talking about fluid matter, is that section. Also, this is producing a dense atmosphere in terms of construction, because these multi-layer walls that can be seen from inside are beautiful and so on. This can be, here we can see the construction, and here we can see the pool in the roof. Of course that there's a lot to talk about, the color of the building, with the working with the charge, the material, and how we've plastered lightly that bricks in order to, with natural lime, in order to get that color which is closer to the charge. To produce, and just to end, to produce that conditions, to give conditions to the fluid part of the building, you need the solid part of the building. You need what gives geometry to the space. To explain that part, I always use that picture, which is a beautiful shot that we get in a quarry in Mallorca. This is the typical limestone from Mallorca that we call mares, and this is a real quarry that was on use by the moment that we took that picture, and that for me explains very well that close relation between the solid and the fluid part in architecture. How the walls, how the structure is the best way to give conditions, not only in terms of support, but also in terms of atmosphere to the inside the space. Very fast. I mean, in that direction, in that approach to that kind of a structure that give conditions to the air, that is producing architecture. How the structure is producing as much architecture as possible. We are trying also to be so old-fashioned that we are trying to produce this with just one material, which is something a little bit snob. I think that is too much, but is when you are in that process, we are trying always to be a little bit farther and farther, trying to produce something not new just because originality, but new in terms of essential. Yeah, we are searching also for the essential of this relation between a structure and a space. So that's why we are trying to produce that kind of, by the moment, houses, because for facilities it's very difficult to get that challenge, which is to produce with just one material wall to give not only the rainproof conditions, but also the inside conditions, to get the insulation, to get everything in terms of condition, and also to produce, to define that inside geometry, to give special conditions, to produce special spaces. This is a house in a beach area close to Barcelona, for a single family, based on that idea of cells surrounding that inside intermediate space that is working as a sun gain space, and also a little bit as a natural chimney in order to produce a cross ventilation. But the interesting part of this building is that was the first house that we tried to do just with one material wall, which is a proton brick, which is a brick with a lot of attributes, that in this house is working as insulation, as a structure, as the geometrical definitor of the inside space, and is producing this beautiful image outside. In some parts it has to be plastered, but is the only extra layer that the house have apart from the structural wall. And just really to end, This is a house that we've and in La Costa Brava in North Barcelona, a beautiful area with nice villages and so on. And just to explain a little bit that final aim, which is to in order to get that essentials in architecture, that essentials in terms of atmosphere, of dense atmosphere, that invisible part of architecture, we are trying also to do it by finding out that essential also in terms of construction. So how we can place into one wall not only the structural behavior but also the insulation behavior, the humidity control behavior, and also of course the cultural behavior. This is a beautiful example of a house that was supposed to be a very strategic and simple example of house, because it was a weekend house placed in a beautiful plot in a beautiful village. It used to be the original plot used to be an agricultural use, so it was nothing to be demolished, and there was a beautiful and amazing stone wall surrounding the plot, as I'm pointing. That beautiful wall was the only previous condition, a part of the orientation and the views and so on. So we decided to develop a very simple house just by attaching the weekend house to the former wall, just producing like a continuous porch attached to the former wall. The problem was when we have finished the project, we went again to the council and they suddenly remembered that the street has to be wider because of the car circulation and some other effects. So it was a very bad news at this moment, because the beautiful wall that was the reason for all the strategy, it had to be demolished. But we decided that to keep on the same line, to keep on the same design line, to try in order to produce that porch house made with a stones wall, giving that kind of sense of geometry, a little bit like a cave, a little bit like a very vernacular construction, with these wide walls that are giving thermal conditions, but also texture and color and so on. But doing it by demolishing the wall and rebuilding the wall in what we call cyclopic concrete. That means a concrete made with that kind of former stones from the wall, but without steel bars inside, using lime as conglomeration of the stones, making this in a very traditional way, layer by layer, 10 centimeters layer overlapping, and so on. Very wide, 40 centimeters, 60 centimeters, in order also to introduce glass air balls to give insulation attributes to the wall. Of course, this kind of very craft work and very simple construction, it can only be done with one floor construction, because it has no steel bars to work as flexion or as traction. So, but you get that kind of new cave, beautiful cave, where the density of the stones are less dense the top it was, because the structural perform is more in that part than here. Then the insulation balls are more dense from here to here, because the structural perform is less important. And that very basic geometrical condition in order to produce spaces that to the street. Well, and just to explain that, at the end of the construction, you get that lime concrete beautiful walls, but just by order of I don't know the name, by drilling a little bit over the wall, by pushing a little bit over the whole wall, we recover the old stones of the former wall in order to give back again to the street the old color of the stones, the old texture of the former wall. On the other, so this is the former wall, and this is the new place for the new facade, which is showing the same stones that used to be just 2 meters left. On the other side, the house just is a pure porch, completely open in summer, and a nice greenhouse on winter because it's a south orientation. And it works basically by itself in terms of climate design. It's basically passive house with a lot of inertia, a lot of insulation, and nice south-oriented windows. It's basically a precast sense of. It's a little bit. I don't know. Well, you know for sure that the Tindaya project of Chillida is a little bit that sense, as in the query image, that you are watching as something that you have carved or dig. That sense of earth, that sense of soil, giving not only shape but also conditions to the space, because it has a specific smell, it has a specific texture, it has everything that makes special. And well, it's beautiful just by its color, but it's also beautiful because in terms of culture we have recovered what it's supposed that has to disappear, which are not the stones but the wall. And with this picture, which is me, my partners and the people of the office having a meal with the owners of the house, I just want to end here my presentation as a happy image, which has, maybe it's a bad picture, but has some of the invisible in architecture, which I hope basically is about happiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josep, for this really, really amazing and interesting lecture. I think in the lecture it's also very interesting how you start and how you end. And definitely you end with this house that in a way, being eventually the smallest project you have shown today, is in a way the one that summarizes and brings together these many questions that you were slowly in the whole process of the lecture bringing in, because I think it was an extremely complex lecture, yeah, extremely complex, starting with the theme. You say this is the invisible. It sounds somehow mysterious at the beginning. Slowly and very clearly we learn what is the invisible. The invisible is the air, but the air is more than that. Yeah, it is the air and what the air produces as a consequence. You know, I was thinking in this when we think in the painters that have been able to paint the air, and we think in Velázquez or Las Meninas, it's a moment in which you have to paint what is impossible to, or you have to represent. In your case, you were showing only visible things because this is online, and therefore it was only visible images, but the words and the images were leading us to this question. So first of all, congratulations for this complexity, but being so complex, it makes it also difficult how to discuss. At some point, you mentioned this idea of the elements. You said the complexity has to be work with these elements that you start to divide. And maybe this helps us to continue the questions. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very interested in the words besides the images, because they explain not only what they say, but also what they do not say. Yeah? And for example, you started saying that, well, your approach was not theoretical at all. Your approach has been extremely objective, and objectivity is a word that came very, very clearly in your work. Even the explanation of every project is somehow very objective. But at the end, I really think, and this is one of the real values of your work in this present moment we live, that you have a real theory based on architecture through this idea of the sort of dense atmosphere, the idea that I was thinking again in another way of structuring architecture. For many years, we know theories about, for example, tectonic architecture being the one that expresses and shows how architecture developed. You know, this is a very expressive one, where structure and construction and the way it comes together is the real core of architecture development. It seems clear that you, or to me, in your presentation, for you, this idea of the environmental questions, sometimes you use the word sustainability, but not so often. You talk much more about the density, atmosphere, air, natural conditions. All these questions are becoming, in your work, a real theoretical position. Clear, a strong one, not an image one. And maybe, even though this is one of the questions that probably more often comes to you, I think it would be somehow important to somehow listen to you again about these questions, because we live in this moment that our generations, for the first time, are aware of this complex situation of the human generation climate change. Okay, this is becoming almost in many places and structures and systems, almost a commercial use of the word of sustainability, based on technology, on green labels, on certifications, missing all these holistic and cultural questions. So in your case, it's exemplary, this commitment to that you were showing. My question would be, for example, it is so clear in some of your projects that you act with this sort of objectivity and modesty into root tradition, patios, brick walls, cross ventilations, plants, etc. But in some other cases, and this is interesting enough, this what you call natural engines, or something like this. For example, I'm thinking in the impressive, beautiful building of Planels with the chimneys, or in the other environmental center, and even in the theater that has a double roof. In some cases, they really become very strong formal expressions. Very, very strong, because form and volume. So my question, to make it short, would be that this is, you think that the architecture that is based on the ideas you have been developed should express it should become an expression of it, or should simply solve it in the best possible ways? Because some of your projects express it very clearly, some others in a way hide it extremely. It reminds me, to go back to structure, projects which are very structurally expressive, where everything is structured, or projects that solve the structure but really do not express it.
What do you think of this?
Yeah, well, you've opened the question is quite concrete, but the context is really open, and it's, I think it's an amazing topic and an amazing issue that we can be talking about that all the afternoon maybe. But well, from the personal approach of the office to that topic, which is the sustainability, I have to say that yeah, it's true that, well, what I was saying is that at the very beginning of the office, we were completely concerned about construction, and as students, or as a very young professional, we hadn't any kind of previous theoretical approach apart from that share of the idea of an anonymous in architecture. Nothing else. It's true that we've been building a theoretical discourse, but based on watching behind, take a look to what we've done, and to put in order our conclusions. So, of course, that I think that as everybody, more or less, it's through the review of what you've done that you can produce a certain discourse. What we have seen, what we have done, is producing still the discourse of the objectivity, but in terms of try to don't put over the table any kind of personal wishes or personal desires. It doesn't mean that we are absolutely objective as architects, which is impossible as human beings. In terms of the topic of the sustainability, we used to be concerned about that, and I think that everybody has to be concerned about that. But the first discovery that we did is that the first strategy in terms of sustainability is to manage the use of the architecture. Is not to we are really aware about solutions that needs we have that, and this is difficult to explain, but I personally have that clear sensation that something that is completely new, like an engine, the final end for definition, by definition, is that will get broken at certain moment. And we have that aim, that hope, to get into an architecture that get old maybe at the end also disappear, but not gets broken. For me, this is the interesting to talk about thermodynamics, but not because we are in a resources crisis, or not because we are architects and not engineers, but because thermodynamics don't get broken. And it's in the specificity of architecture. To talk about the width of a wall, to talk about the size and the orientation of a hall, is about architecture. And a very efficient machine, a very efficient engine, which is designed that it would be the most efficient system, can be certified, but it's not about the specificity of architecture. We are not against machines, of course, and we are using engines in all our facilities. But it's not about our interest. We're not concerned about machines. We want to solve everything in that homogeneous solution that assumes not only the cultural dimension, not only the use dimension, but also the behavior dimension by managing the thermodynamics and the physics phenomena. This is also sustainable strategies, but it's not our interest to be sustainable. It's our interest to solve as maximum as possible issues into the discipline of architecture. We want to play, and this is something very important also to me with the students in the school. I don't know if you agree, but we are now moving not only in the professional dimension, also in the students, that sense that you've been explaining a little bit about the something else that is not about architecture. Of course that at the end you're living that social conscious, you're living that environmental conscious through architecture. But I'm only interested about that if it can be part of the discipline in terms of projecting the architecture that will happen. If not, I think that there's professionals that can do all that stuff better than we are. And about sometimes that thermodynamical management system needs to be shown, as for example the sun chimneys. The sun chimneys are real natural engines because, of course, are made of plastic and are really expressive in terms of shape and architecture. But it just works with the greenhouse effect, with the chimney effect, and with the Venturi effect. It are effects demonstrated by nature, so the effect, the performatic part of this element will not get broken. Maybe the plastic will not live forever, for sure, but the effect is forever. So this is important to us, and it has to be very expressive because it has to be in the part. But for example, the beautiful of these chimneys that are beautiful as objects, if you see that, is a very expressive sculpture, but is designed in order that, as is a fixed geometry that is not based on engines that moves up and down and so on, it's based on the angle of the sun on each moment of the day. So it's very objective, it's very based in something that is forever, like thermodynamics. Also has that expressive part that we don't deny and we sometimes is necessary. But at the end, I still think that this very expressive part is part of the specifics in architecture, which is to organize matter in order to produce an atmosphere. But sometimes I think that people is, not only people, maybe sometimes our students are doing, we are trying to be more than architects. And I don't want to be engineer, and I don't want to be something else than an architect. I don't know, because I'm sure that you're also dealing with that issue with your students and also with your colleagues.
Definitely, this is I don't need to say it, a common ground now among the university themes and the interest of the students and of us. Sometimes the students asking questions before us, and sometimes us trying to find out this way of getting away, and this is something that I really would like, of the oversimplifications of this theme, because it's very easy to oversimplify. But I'm going to go to a couple of words that you said now. I listen very carefully always, no? And you said these sort of natural machines do not broken. I mean, these are really working. You mentioned forever, and then you mentioned thermodynamics, and obviously the second law of thermodynamics probably doesn't say exactly that. This leads at the end to entropy, but I'm not going to go into this very other deeper questions, but rather about what it means in another thing that you mentioned and was very important in your lecture, which is time. Yeah, how time, which is it's so wide the theme that I will only focus on this theme of entropy, broken, your buildings not to be broken, but I'm sure they will be anyway. This is what will happen, and how you, nevertheless, for example, they work with pre-existence and with materials is very, very close to buildings that somehow broken, buildings that lost its capacity. You mentioned very interestingly how you working in one of the theaters, you wanted to use the wood, but it was not possible to use the wood because it doesn't work anymore, and then you recycle it in a different way. Or to me, this beautiful house of Ullastret, where you want to use the stone, but then you have to move it, etc., etc. This leads to this question about materials. Interestingly enough, you mentioned materials, but you use much more the word matter, yeah? Much more than material. And you use it obviously because you refer to the solid and to the flowing gas or liquid, etc. But if we talk now about the solid question, brick is very often present in your work, but not only. It is also about, as you said, the connection to industrialized systems. You mentioned polycarbonate, and then, or you use the glass blocks or industrial products, etc., etc. So a way of asking this question would be, do you think that this now your work is extremely interesting because it balances the work of a craft or tradition with the contemporary catalog materials that are to be used in order to create these natural engines? You didn't mention it, but you show very often the construction site, explaining the emotion of being there the day that this or that happened. Yeah? Do you think that this will be possible in the next future? For example, I'm thinking in this way of working brick. Brick is in history a material. In Spain and in Catalonia still is a material we can use because there is a tradition and there are, say, cheap labor that can make it. But for example, I would say in Germany is a much more difficult, expensive thing. It's much more about prefabricated panels. So this limits you to work into your local environment of this, or what would happen when you cannot really work with this with the hands, so to say?
Sure. Now, when I was talking about that concept of the forever, obviously that the concept of time in architecture is not the concept of time of the universe and so on. So of course that the second law of thermodynamics is not absolutely coherent with what I've said. But in terms of managing of time, I think that we can assume that at least our aim is to be as old as possible. Let's say as old as possible, and to there's a concept in. To get old with dignity, okay, so with certain level of dignity in front. Maybe at the end you die, but do that with elegance and with as good conditions as possible. So and then that idea of getting old, because I think that is not the same. Well, there's a nice tale in the trilogy of New York of Paul Auster, who talks about, I don't remember exactly, but there's a character in the novel that is like a crazy guy in New York who has a real issue about his umbrella because the umbrella is broken. So as a rainproof system, it has not much sense, but as a help for, I don't know what he used. So for him, what is understandable is why everybody's calling umbrella to something that is not working as an umbrella, but is already useful for other things. So it was the beautiful, it was about semiotics and semiology on the tale, but for me it's a little bit the same. There's what we are asking to that pre-existing organized matter is not if as a building is still useful. Is if as organized matter, as something that has to find out what are the attributes that are already there. And I'm sure that always there's, as that final wall that I've shown in the house, the wall has disappeared, but the stone has still specific attributes to place, to behave, to perform into the new house. So that's, of course, that there's always, because it's, but for me, the idea of an engine, of a machine, it's not exactly like that. When gets broken, it's not useful anymore. It's not, and then this is our, well, we have that, we are a little bit, not against the engineers, but against that engineering atmosphere, engineering conceptual approach to everything, that in terms of sustainability, everything is about efficiency. And for us, it's not about efficiency. Maybe it's about efficiency for everybody, for the society in general, but for architecture, what is interesting is talk about demand, not to talk about efficiency. We can talk about demands, so how through architecture we can live better, make people happier, to don't need the car to go to the work or so on, or to need less heating system and so on. Not about efficiency. Efficiency is for the engineers, not for us. It's my opinion, and I want to sound too much dogmatic about that, but it's a certain sense. About the bricks, it's a little, we are not dogmatic about the bricks, because for us the bricks, till a certain moment of the office, it's not now, puts together a lot of things. For example, we did like 12 years ago a timber panels, a CLT timber panels house in Barcelona. It was one of the first timber panels, and it was like 15 years ago, timber panels house in close Barcelona, because the timber panels, CLT panels, is close to the idea of structural walls. We were not concerned about timber because it's a biospheric material that it is. We were concerned about the structural walls as a system to put together structure and geometry. That's why we come into the timber panels, because the plot was so difficult because of the budget, and it was impossible to make just brick walls. So we used the timber panels because we wanted to do structural walls in that idea of homogeneous solution between a structure and space. So we are not really dogmatic about the bricks, but the bricks have another attribute that for us, in terms of produce that comfort, that to give conditions to the air, is the concept of inertia. And this is, of course, that the concept of inertia, even now, in Barcelona, is becoming something impossible. Why? Because in a Mediterranean climate, as we have here, the inertia model, based not only in put a lot of heavy to stabilize temperature, but also to make a lot of cross-ventilation to take off the construction, the excess of heat during night. This is possible in all Catalonia. It's basically possible in all Spain. But in cities like Madrid, or especially in Barcelona, that during summertime, the temperature at night, because it becomes heat islands, the temperature at night doesn't go down 20 degrees, then that strategy doesn't work anymore. So our own strategy, we have to assume that is not possible everywhere, and it's very specifically possible in my town, using bricks because our clothes are cheap and so on. But now we have just presented a competition in Bordeaux, and we are doing a deeper research about how to do pilotaje, micropilots, an underground system based on lime concrete and so on. I think that, but it's true that we still believe that even in a modern facility like a museum, like a modern museum like we just presented last week, even in that cases, inertia as a system to stabilize the indoor temperature is a good system. The brick is not always the best system for that, and in fact, I'm supposed that just because we are always excited to do deeper research in something, we are changing a little bit our approach to that. And I know that in Germany it's...
Yeah. No, I agree. I like to hear that, because you were talking about this relation with students and discussions and about all these questions. And in many cases, when I mean oversimplification, in Germany it might not be so much about only brick, because it's not the case, but it's definitely about wood, like being almost the only possible way, which I like to hear your opinion, because it deals with this sort of inclusive attitude that can deal with different situations, different, therefore, materials, and understanding this is a sort of holistic question that is much more complex than reducing it to a simple thing. Yeah, that's the reason I like also. It's true that your work was at the beginning more connected to the image of the brick, but you didn't show that much projects of brick, and when you show it at the end, it was one of these houses in which you really were very proud of a brick that can solve many questions, as you said, within the climate conditions that you were working, which is not everywhere, yeah? It's a German, by the way. Perfect. So that fits here in this discussion, yeah? So I like also questions that you were saying when you mentioned engineers, numbers, efficiency. These climate questions are, like many things, most things in our world, reduced to numbers. Yeah, like economy at the end seems to be only reduced to numbers. And it is interesting to see that obviously you mentioned this objectivity that comes from numbers, but in your projects, to me at least, and this is my personal, it's very interesting what it is not so easily expressible in numbers. It is exactly what it is coming from. I like, obviously, for example, the words of Louis Kahn of the unmeasurable. I mean, it sounds very spiritual, but it can come also very linked to your atmosphere conditioning. It's measured, yes, you measure temperature and you mentioned wind velocity and so on, but altogether it's not anymore measurable, and you mentioned very often the word memory and time. So let me go to this also relation to time, in this case connected to pre-existence, because if there is another question that nowadays is in the air, not only the air, in our work, in the discussions, in the work of the work, that comes and makes sense in the next times and now, is the reuse of the existent. Yeah? You show it very clear in different ways. It is not necessarily connected to conditions that you find, but it's also, I understand, a conscious wish on your side. Yeah? This is one part of the question, because the other one would be, at the end, using pre-existing structures, not only structures, you use walls, pieces of walls, naked, structural or construction elements, flooring, etc., etc. It becomes a sort of a collage, and even though you try to be and you are very objective in your presentation, at the end, are you conscious that this is also an aesthetic? And are you conscious that it can become, and I'm talking about not only students, young people, younger officers, a sort of a style? And in that sense, are you worried or not about that?
Well, of course, that the aesthetic part of, for me, that this is the difficult part to define, talking about the invisible. The invisible in terms of our complex approach to everything in architecture. And the aesthetics is the most difficult part to define for me. In terms of the... But I have to... There's a part of the office process that is impossible to be explained, because it's the work in progress, that is absolutely based in intuition. Not only about the aesthetics, also about what you've been talking about before, about not only the systems, or not only the thermodynamics, also the structure. Structure is a lot of intuition, and I have to say that in terms of structural intuition, we are really skilled. At the end, the numbers has to be done by an engineer friend of us, and of course that the simulations of all our inventions has to be done by an engineer friend of us. that kind of engineers that assumes that the solution is not about a machine, it's about calculation, or is about physical concepts, or is about thermodynamics. It's not about a specific engine that has a catalog, perfect catalog that explains specific numbers and so on. So the intuition is not only about aesthetics, the intuition is also about installation, functions, and structures. And as you remember, there's also a Louis Kahn sentence that he hates installations, but that's why he became a specialist about that, to make it possible into architecture. So we're a little bit like that. But the intuition process that we follow in the office, which is really based on atmospheric images, we work a lot with models, with big models, but not with the model as object, but the model as something that I can shoot with a picture in order to transform, in order to produce at the end visual effects, but that helps us to imagine systems to produce that density in atmosphere. I suppose that with the facades it happened the same to us, working more about the idea of the atmosphere in the public place, or the atmosphere that you are producing or you're helping to produce in the common place, which is the public space. So, but in that sense, I think that as everybody, for us is easier to explain not only our projects, but also our work in progress in the office as an objective and methodologic process. But there's a high level of intuition, which is also about the aesthetics in architecture, that the only more or less objective issue that we use is the idea of to be coherent between the systems, or between the structure, and how this shows to in terms of facade or in terms of internal facade. We are also trying to achieve into something that we began to call the extraordinary, something that is a little bit out of the ordinary, not a way of to be coherent with the structure, but in order to don't be only coherent with the structure. This is something that is also important to us. Also, again, absolutely difficult, and I'm sure that for you, I'm sure that is the same a little bit for all the architects that do beautiful buildings like you do. So, I think that would be like, in no sense, try to define as an objective process what we do in terms of not of facade, of the whole project. The whole project at the end is an intuitive process. But it's true that, I don't know if it's the same for you, but as we are four, that we have to more or less discuss, if not the whole project, because of course that we divide a little bit responsibilities and so on, but there's very strategical points of the project, the competition, the certain meetings with everyone, so that we have to put together all the intuitions, and then just because of the method of discussion, the method of dialogue, I think that the coherent at the end shows up a little bit. And I think that, but it's really difficult to catch where you get the extraordinary and all that process. But we still have that challenge. I don't know.
It is what at the end makes architecture what it is, extraordinary, unmeasurable, maybe invisible, as you said. But let me, one last question before we end up, because I think we have this time limit about the discussion. You mentioned so often, and it's clear, this idea of density as an atmospherical density, or dense atmosphere, etc. Your buildings and your projects express it through this value and air condition that makes it what you pretend, and is so clear in your, for example, sections, images of the buildings, etc. That means that they need space, volume, let's put it that way. Actually, your sections are, to me, dealing also with a very interesting question, which is compressing and expanding space, which is something extremely important in architecture, but that needs, obviously, volume and space. So how can you sort of work together the idea of a dense atmosphere that is in the background of all your methodology, attitude, approach, with the density that contemporary cities not only have, eventually even need, because of also sustainable questions. How can you really develop on a larger scale questions or spaces or ideas that, in my point of view, need space on volume?
Yeah, well, of course that in general we are not out of the conventions and of the wall in terms of economics and in terms of urban development, and of course that we are dealing with projects that are always in plots that are too small and so on, and norms and regulations that always try to put you into standards that are always small and so on and so on. Well, in general, we never lose the faith in order to convince the client that it's possible that at least to produce an extraordinary moment in terms of size, in terms of volume, even the whole project needs also more secondary spaces, or in order to assume a specific program. For example, we've just finished a very beautiful house for a friend, which is an attached typical house in the middle of a town here close to Barcelona. In order to get an amazing, extraordinary sitting 12 meters high, that is amazing because it's like a patio, and he's absolutely surprised that how comfortable is the space, because it's just 20 square meters but 12 meters high, but the light is perfect. It's because the sun gained reason, and also about thermodynamics and so on and so on. But it's an amazing sitting room of 20 square meters, 12 meters high. The density is because of the brick and so on. But to get that is because we have convinced him that in a medium big size house, he just needs 2 bedrooms. He really just needs 2 bedrooms. Conventional bedrooms in terms of size and so on. And we have the faith enough, or we transmit the faith enough, or they believe us enough to assume a house with less program in terms of functions, but extraordinary at least in 1 or 2 moments. This house is also interesting because we are working with brick and timber on the same time. It's like a tower, is like a timber CLT panels tower with 1 bedroom over the other, the kitchen, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and a studio, in front in parallel to that amazing seating of 12 meters high. The tower inside is made of timber. The tower outside, which is stabilizing the whole project, is made of brick, giving inertia. It's a nice combination of both. But as I said, is that idea that is a very conventional urban conditions and normative and so on, but it's a little bit to try to transmit that we have to don't lose faith in order to get at least something extraordinary into the ordinary.
Well, I think this is a very good way to end this discussion. That I would really like to have it very, very much longer, and I'm sure we are going to have it. I personally, because I have to go more often now to Catalonia for several professional reasons. But besides that, I really would like that the not only the members of the Academy that will listen to this lecture, but also I'm expecting my students in Berlin to be very aware of these ideas that you were showing through realities, and because they really give a real input into this discussion that is let's say, even the main theme to come and to be now in the next years and the next times in architecture. So thank you very much, Josep. Congratulations again to you and the whole team of HARQUITECTES, and I'm looking forward to see you definitely next time, at least in Berlin, so that the other members of the Academy can meet you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Enrique, and I hope to see you soon in Berlin or in Barcelona. Thank you, everybody.